Hi everyone and welcome back to SwitchUp and to our addictive games series that can be a little bit dangerous. Today we're going to look at the game 30XX, which is a sequel to 20XX which came out in 2014. Now if you're a fan of the classic Mega Man X series, then 30XX might appeal to you for a number of reasons. It's also going to appeal to those who like roguelike games, but those who are a bit fed up of them and would just prefer a more traditional experience. And there's a very big community aspect that we're going to talk about. It aims to bring back the glory days of Mega Man, and my goodness is it difficult, but I felt that it had to be featured in our addictive games series for reasons which we are about to find out. Does 30XX make you feel like a hero, or just a zero? Well, my name is Mark Walker, welcome back to SwitchUp. Now let's find out. As far as narrative goes, things are a little thin on the ground. This time round, you can play as either Nina or Ace, two androids who awake 1,000 years after the events of 20XX, and the world isn't quite what they remember. Throw into that a slightly unusual scientist whose machinations have the potential to destroy the world, and well, that's gotta be good enough reason to go out on loads of runs, kill loads of things, defeat many bosses, and then do it all again. Gameplay is where things get very interesting. While you have standard mode, which has traditional roguelike elements, including procedurally generated levels with predefined boss fights, there's also Mega Mode in here for those who, as I said at the start, want a more linear experience. This is nice. It basically puts you in the middle of all of the stages, and you can play them in whichever order you want, and they'll remain the same. Death in this mode means going back to this area, but you'll keep your progression, and those levels will be the same each time you play. I was very happy to see this in there. On the flip side of that is the standard roguelite mode. That sees you starting out in the HQ, which is essentially your base. From here you can switch between the two playable characters. Nina, who resembles someone, has an energy weapon, and Ace, who's more of a melee-focused character with an energy sword and some sort of boomerang. Regardless of which mode you choose, there are certain aspects that remain the same. Chiefly, this is a fast-paced, tough-as-nails side-scrolling action platformer that puts the emphasis on continuous motion. If the player stands still, trust me, they're not going to last very long. Now with that said, I found myself gravitating towards the roguelite aspect of the game as it simply felt a bit easier. Sometimes when you kill enemies, they'll drop health pickups or shield boosters, and the way you move throughout the stages is really quite satisfying. Whether it's the single jump or the unlocked double jump, you can do a short dash move that's designed to be combined with a jump to increase your distance and speed up your overall movement. Input latency is low enough that everything feels nice and precise, despite the movement in the air feeling a tiny bit floaty. For me personally, this just gives me a window of opportunity to try and escape if I make a mistake. Pressing yourself against a surface enables a secondary jump, and you can jump from wall to wall or straight up the same one. Levels are filled with small puzzles, different coloured switches lighting up different platforms, timed platforms that you need to be very quick to get across, and then disgustingly difficult community levels, which we'll talk about in a minute. The whole experience can be played with a friend as well in local co-op or online. You'll have to excuse my daughter, she has never played a game quite so difficult, so if we look rubbish, it's because we were rubbish. Now, in between the stages, a bit like Guacamelee, sometimes you'll have enclosed sections. What's nice is that these were optional. If you felt like your run was going particularly well or you were very close to the end of a stage, you could choose to pass these up and move on. Otherwise, you'd be sealed in with a couple of criteria to get you the best possible reward. Now, rewards come in a few different flavors, as well as a number of different currencies that I have to say, 30XX does a crap job of explaining. You have nuts, as in like nuts and bolts, and remember, it is always preferable to hold your nuts. There's Memoria, which is used for the meta upgrades, and there are tokens in here as well. Generally though, you'll receive a blessing once you complete one of those sections, which are your typical 3-choice upgrades. These will go into your inventory and will be permanent until you die if you're playing the roguelite mode, or just permanent if you're not. As is typical, at the end of each stage there's a boss fight, but sprinkled in you'll find glory zones. These are really cool. I class these as the flex moment, where you've got to the end of a stage and you've taken almost no damage, and it offers you one final roll of the dice, one final challenge, and a nice juicy blessing-based incentive to achieve it. Again, entirely optional, but people will really enjoy challenging themselves and the inevitable frustration that comes if you absolutely mess it up. Weapons also have different subcategories and styles, with a new one unlocked after every boss. Challenge missions essentially let you take on a positive reward for a negative element, a bit like the curses we saw in Curse of the Dead Dishonored gods. These will come around at the start of a new area and will offer you some tantalizing thing in exchange for something hideous. I'd say it's probably a good time to mention accessibility, because some of you might have switched off at the thought of a very difficult game, which this is on its default settings. But the accessibility options let you change everything from the amount of damage the enemies do to you to the amount of health that you have overall. I don't know what it is though, I just find myself unable to touch those, as if by doing so I'd inherently change the way the game was designed. But I know that's silly, it's not the case, and for many of you it's nice that that's in there. If you've managed to squirrel all your nuts together, then you can take those into the game's shops, another aspect that will feel very familiar to roguelite fans. Then we have meta progression, which is all important in my opinion to a good roguelite, and here it's actually very powerful. Things like being able to revive yourself once when you die, some significant improvements to your health and your armor, the unlocking of new areas, and of course items and gear. I was quite pleased with the meta progression here. What started out as a very difficult game soon became much more manageable. 30XX is definitely an improvement over its predecessor in a few different ways, but it doesn't avoid all the pitfalls that you find with procedural generation. While it's clear that they've used a modular procedural generation system, so small pre-designed chunks linked together in a random order, which does work well, some of those chunks are much more difficult than others, and I guess that falls into the nature of its roguelite roots. Ergo, one run will certainly be more powerful and easier than another. The HQ has a number of secrets, a couple of different modes. One of those allows you to turn the game into what's essentially a boss rush mode, and the other lets you go on runs with back-to-back community maps, which is the perfect segue onto what I think is probably the most interesting aspect of the game. Those excellent online community maps. These have a rating system attached to them, so obviously the cream rises to the top, and I'd felt there was a touch of Sonic in the flow of the game. And then one of the first maps that I saw, well, it's the Green Hill Zone. Then you'll find classics from Mega Man X, and they're really good. Now, I believe to make those maps you actually need to be on the PC version of the game, but to play them, obviously you can do that on Switch. My biggest issue with 30XX is in its opacity. What on earth do you mean, Mark, it's opacity? I mean, it doesn't tell you what anything does. There's a brief tutorial at the start, but other than that, it will speak about things that you haven't got a clue what they are. It just feels a little bit vague. It can get a bit frustrating at times. I do enjoy this style of game. It doesn't quite grip me as much as some other roguelites, but it's still very fun. I'd give gameplay 16 out of 20 and the controls score 17 out of 20. Now, I think I'm not mistaken in saying that it's the same artist that did the artwork on Rogue Legacy, who's also worked on Chasm, Duelist and Full Metal Furies, and it certainly looks the part. It's not just the bright colours and the contrast, it's certainly a step up in my opinion from the last game, and the soundtrack was created by Brandon Ellis, who also composed 20XX's soundtrack, and it's always nice to see a self-taught musician showcasing what's possible. Performance is solid. There are a few bugs in the game. I had a camera bug that sent the camera completely in the wrong direction when I was at the HQ. I did find an option though in the menu to reset the camera, and during the stages I didn't have any issues, but text size is a real problem for me in this one. The text is ludicrously small, which has to impact the visual and performance score because it's one of the most frustrating things when you're trying to play a game and you literally can't read what's going on. But I am on version 1.00 and the day one patch that you're getting is 1.0.1, which fixes a ridiculous amount of bugs, as well as including loads of tweaks to the overall gameplay. And I think that's kind of the story of these developers. They've always been really responsive to the community, implementing changes and updates, but they need a text size option. Visuals and performance score 15 out of 20, sound and audio score 17 out of 20. 30XX releases on Switch on the 1st of September in the US regions, and I think it's the 13th here in the UK. It'll cost you $19.99 or your regional equivalent, and as mentioned, you can play it solo, with local co-op, with wireless LAN co-op, or online co-op. It has both the roguelite and standard gameplay modes. There's a boss rush in here, and then the community handcrafted maps based on all your favourites, allowing you to go on a community run, which was a really nice idea. While it doesn't have a physical just yet, and I can't see anything about one, you'll have to let me know in the comments if you've seen something, I still think this is really good value for money, and I would give that 18 out of 20. 30XX is a challenging but worthwhile, fast-paced action platformer based on some of your favourites. It can be punishing and unforgiving, but with enough accessibility options to essentially cater for any ability and the really enjoyable two-player co-op, it's one I'm going to be playing for a while. It gets a SwitchUp score of 83%. Not too shabby at all. Let me know in the comments, is this one you're interested in? Will you be picking it up? As if we have any room in the backlog. Ay caramba. Thanks so much for watching, and for all things Switch, all the time, keep it Switch up. Cheers guys. See ya!